service in small communities. One of the things that we find is I found when I was in the airlines, and as we talk to the airline planners, is there's a tendency to really focus on the largest of the airports around the country for lots of reasons. And you can see here that the airports are all designated by the FAA as large hub, which are huge airports like DFW and Houston Intercontinental. Medium hubs, Austin might fit into that. Small hubs, non-hubs, non-primary airports along the way. But those large and medium hubs are the largest of the airports, and you see those represent 16% of the airports in the country, but 89% of the employments. So as a result, there's a tremendous focus on those airports. The other 84% of the airports produce 11%. It's the old 90-10 relationship that you see in most industries. But as a result, while they don't ignore small hubs and non-hubs, they really focus on the largest of the airports. It's a lot easier to add another flight from New York to Chicago, where there are just thousands of people traveling every day. It's a safer bet than looking at a smaller market and adding another flight. Killeen ranked number 167 in 2008 in terms of employments, and is designated as a non-hub airport. Now, what happened as the airlines looked at the hubs and non-hubs, or large and non-hubs over this time, basically, since 2000, there was a significant reduction in non-hub airport flying. And you can see that from this graph, looking at the first column are the large hubs, and they're down 15% overall. The blue, the 31% reduction in non-hub airports is significant. And while it was a 31% reduction in seats, it was a 41% decrease in departures, because during this time period, they took out many of the smallest of aircraft because they just couldn't operate them efficiently. Small prop airplanes in particular were replaced. Yes, sir.
I missed what you said about Killeen ranking 167 out of how many?
Out of, well, during this period, there were 65, 136, 402 airports during this time period.
Is there a further ranking of regions? I would suspect Killeen's a relatively large regional carrier in this area, or?
I will have a chart later where I'll show you Killeen relative in terms of capacity and employments relative to airports in Texas. Maybe that'll help answer what you're looking for. But yes, in terms of the Southwest, there's no question that Killeen ranks a little bit better. But 167 is not a bad. That's not a bad thing. That just happens to be the number.
Oh, I agree. Unless there's only 168, I didn't know. If I had to ask how many.
Exactly. But I think it was 180 something. But the 31% reduction, again, part of that is once again shifting capacity out of from domestic markets to international. Taking airplanes, there was a whole domino effect where they took the largest aircraft that were flying transcons in many cases and shifted many of those 757s and others into international operations. They then took the next tier of aircraft and put those into the transcons. And what happened in DFW, for example, is airplanes that were flying to the West Coast or the East Coast that were 757s, or 180-seat airplanes maybe, became MD-80s. And the MD-80s were replaced with regional jets. So there was a domino effect. And then at the bottom tier, aircraft came out. American took out the Saabs. They brought the ATRs in from San Juan. There were a number of changes made in that regard, but there was a squeezing of the non-hub airports in many cases. The airlines for the longest time thought that the small regional jets were going to be the answer. The answer to so many issues. Markets just could not support 100-seat airplanes. 50-seat airplanes would work perfectly. And that was fine, and then as fuel started going up, they realized the economics of that were a lot different than people ever expected it to be. The other thing the airlines did, as part of this restructuring, as part of this changing and moving their fleets around and so forth, because they found they couldn't raise fares. Well, they tried, and there were in 2008 a number of fare increases, which is part of why we saw that, probably 2007 rather. But the airlines squeezed the flights and squeezed markets to increase load factors. For the longest time, we really thought 70% load factor was the ultimate optimal load factor for the airline industry. For years, that was the feeling on the part of aircraft manufacturers and airlines, that once you got beyond that, you were just leaving too many passengers behind. heavier days of the week, Fridays and Monday mornings, there just wouldn't be any seats available if you tried to squeeze it down to accommodate or maximize your load factors on the smaller days, like Tuesdays and Wednesdays and Saturdays. But the airlines have basically looked at it now and said, you know, we really can't afford to carry a lot of extra seats on Tuesday and Wednesday just so we carry those extra 5 or 10 people on Friday afternoon. So they've put smaller aircraft in many, many routes. They've reduced frequency in so many of the routes. And as a result, load factors increased. You can see there from 60% on average in 1990 up to that 70% theoretical optimal range toward the end of the 90s, hitting 70% there in 98 through about 2001. You had some fluctuations, of course, because of what was going on in the industry. But since then, the industry's grown to be an 80% load factor. And 80% means that, you know, as a business passenger, you just don't have that empty seat next to you anymore if you even have a seat next to you. A lot of times you're on an airplane that's only one seat down the aisle. But load factors are much higher. The airline industry hit 87% in July. That's July, and that's you know, heavier than it's going to be in November, of course. But the bottom line is they've been unable to increase fares because not all the carriers will go along with fare increases, and they cannot afford to be uncompetitive. So as a result, they've maximized load factor as best they can. But the point is, where do you go from here? It's very, very difficult across the year to accomplish anything better than an 80% load factor. There are markets that operate in the 90s. You know, leisure markets primarily are markets that you would look at as maybe being underserved, but there are markets that operate pretty much 90% load factor, but you just can't get to 100%. So the question is, how much higher can you get? One of the things that's happening is capacities have come out of the marketplace. Communities have become much more aggressive in going to the airlines, looking to get air service. Communities that just have not been able to attract in the pace in the past, or we've lost their air service. Just 3 examples. Roswell, New Mexico, and I picked these 3 because I think they've all been pretty well publicized. There are so many more examples out there, many of it are held pretty private by the airlines and the communities themselves. But these were somewhat public. Roswell, New Mexico, California, Manhattan, Kansas, a very recent example. But Roswell got together with, you know, the state, the counties, the local cities, you know, all got together and accumulated $4.2 million and went to American Airlines, who continually said, you know, no, we're not going to serve Roswell. It's too risky for us. We're not going to take that risk. We hear what you're saying. Sounds like a lot of people would fly our airline, but we can't afford to spend $5 million flying a couple of airplanes on the fact that it's good faith that people are going to fly them. So, you know, they said, if you come up with some guarantees, we'll give it a shot. State put forth a lot of money, as I said. The counties, they came up with $4.2 million. They came to American and said, would you put air service into Roswell? And they did. And it's worked very well. As a matter of fact, American has tapped very little of that $4 million pool at this point in time. Roswell's now used that to get American to add some service to Los Angeles on top of the service to Dallas. Arcata, California did a similar thing with Delta Airlines to Salt Lake City. In addition to a revenue guarantee, which wasn't quite so high, they did what they call the travel bank, which was basically getting local businesses to put money into a pool that said, you know, this money is here, and it's earmarked for travel on Delta Airlines, and it won't be used for anything else. And it's basically use it or lose it. And what Delta loves about that is that not only does it commit the air travel, but because companies have committed these funds to this bank, they tell their employees to use it right away. So instead of a long ramp-up period, which airlines traditionally run on new markets, the company started using the services immediately. And within months, they used up most of that bank. Within 3 months, I think they'd used 70% of it, and within 6 months, they'd used like 90% of it. So it really helped jumpstart the market.